Welcome to Medyascope, everyone. The world is talking coronavirus, so are we. As Medyascope, we are covering different aspects that coronavirus is having an effect on in local and global scale. Today, my guest is Sumitir Broka from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He's Senior Policy Officer for Central Asia and Turkey. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here because having easy access to food and having an organized supply chain in agriculture can become very problematic during a pandemic. So also you are being tested during this crisis as the FAO, right?
Yes, that's correct. You see, I should clarify at the outset that we are part of a United Nations country team in each country. Now, at this stage of the epidemic, the focus is necessarily on lives, on saving lives, and on managing the coronavirus epidemic. So the World Health Organization, WHO, necessarily takes the lead in this respect. Now, what we do is we work with our host government, in this case, the government of Turkey, to particularly collect information, analyze information, synthesize it, and we collect information from many countries. We collate it, we make it available to the host government so that they get some idea of what's going on in other countries. And we work with the Turkish government and with other governments to coordinate an international response.
As you said, you are collecting information, data, but the main case, the aim is saving lives. And we all know that the FAO acts in an organized manner. What I want to ask is, did you imagine or discuss the possibility that something like what we are experiencing today might happen? I mean, was this possibility ever a topic in your internal meetings, for instance?
Yes, indeed, it was. Starting from, I would say, about late February. Starting from late February, yes, because it was around that time that the epidemic really took off in Italy. And then we started discussing the possibility that it might also hit Turkey. Istanbul, as you know, particularly out of all of Turkey, is probably the most exposed because of the volume of tourism that it gets, because of the airport, because millions of people go through it. So, however, it's fair to say that, to be very honest, till early March, we had not really imagined that it would become such a big crisis. That's a fact.
It's a surprise, right?
Yeah, and that applies, I think, it's only fair to say that. We should have done better in terms of thinking about what it could potentially grow into based on the experience of Hubei province in China and Wuhan city in particular. But it didn't really register as such a serious problem until it hit Italy. That's a fact.
It was like a chain. It was like a domino effect, right?
It was like a domino effect, yes, indeed. And you have to remember that in an epidemic like this, when cases are growing exponentially, that is to say they're doubling every few days, even today, when the percentage of new cases reported every day is now declining, indicating that it will eventually reach 0% growth in a few days, or possibly a couple of weeks, hopefully. Even today, the growth rate is still about 6%. In other words, every day we have 6% more cases than we had the previous day. And this means that the number, which is about 75,000 now, will probably double at this rate in about 12 days. And it's the speed of growth that's that I think it took a lot of people, it caught a lot of people by surprise, yes, we weren't expecting it, to be very honest.
I want to talk about the effects actually, because as the FAO, what are your feelings about the negative effects of this pandemic so far, especially on the supply chain in agriculture and food? I mean, another question, what kind of measures have you taken until today?
You see, look, in terms of the impact so far, there are two main channels. Okay, one is that because of the social isolation and self-distancing measures taken by the government, and the Turkish government is not alone. Every government in this entire in the world is taking very similar actions. The issue is that a lot of people cannot work.
Yes.
And especially poorer people, people who are doing manual labor, who are doing jobs that bring them into contact with other people. For instance, anybody working in a restaurant, working, in occupations like that, where they can't work anymore, and they've lost their incomes, okay, or at the very least, their incomes have been drastically cut. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that we were actually worried that supply chains might be affected, but that doesn't seem to be the case so far in any country, okay, that we are aware of. I mean, there's been at most a minor impact. Now, if you take Turkey, for example, one impact has been on the fisheries industry, because a lot of aquaculture products and fish were being exported from Turkey. Okay, now that, yes, that has turned out to be a problem, and exports have shrunk quite drastically. Okay.
I understand. It's not a minor problem. It looks like a minor effect, but it's quite major actually.
For people who depend on fisheries, yes, indeed. If you're a fisherman and you can't sell the fish you catch, then you've got a big problem on your hands, because your income has dropped. Okay, so again and again we come back to the importance of protecting people's income. Okay, because if they don't have money, then how are they going to afford to buy food? But if one looks at the supply of food, by and large, it's not really very badly affected so far. What does concern us as FAO is, and I should go back and say that this applies to the neighboring countries. It applies to Central Asia. We haven't seen any clear evidence of a major disruption in supply chains. Okay, so food is still flowing into the cities where the majority of the population lives. And now, yes, indeed, there are, fisheries as an example. In general, we can expect to see problems in the supply of perishable commodities. Okay, so things like fish, milk particularly, because milk goes bad very quickly, and fruit and vegetables, horticultural products generally. Okay, so these are the sort of areas where we can expect to see an impact. Right now, what concerns us is the winter harvest, okay, whether that can be gathered and brought in. And then the second thing is, what about planting for the autumn harvest, which is due to come in the next 2 months or so. Again, that does, you see, now here we have a bit of a dilemma, because you don't want to apply strict social distancing to agricultural workers, because obviously if they're going to be standing 2 meters apart from one another, then they can't be, doing their work. So it's very important to make sure that they have personal protective equipment, and that they have facilities, for example, for washing their hands, masks, gloves, etc., so that they can protect themselves at least to some extent. Again, to the best of our knowledge, this has not been a major problem yet in Turkey. Okay. Yes. So farm operations are continuing. The flow of farm produce from the rural areas to the urban areas is continuing. And as I said, I mean, Turkey has a very productive and varied agriculture.
Yes.
So, we don't really feel that there's any major problem so far. If the lockdown measures have to be continued for a long time, then it is possible that something that we could run into problems. Sorry, that was a rather long answer. I hope.
No, 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 no. It's quite understandable. As we know, even though there are some disagreements, Turkey is an culturally active country, and Turkey's position in the fight against coronavirus, it's worth to discuss. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
As the FAO, what are your
Mm-hmm.
recommendations for world governments in the medium term, not just Turkey, and what are the main suggestions to global governance?
Uh-huh. Okay. See, there are two main suggestions. Okay, one is that to the extent possible, I know it depends on government capacity, it depends on budgetary capacity. We have to make sure somehow to at least provide food and other essentials to people who have lost their jobs. That has to be protected. And this can be done either through direct cash transfers to households that have lost income, or by directly providing food. But you see, whenever you impose a lockdown of this kind, you are condemning hundreds of thousands of people to lose their jobs, basically, their means of livelihood, to be more precise. And you've got to somehow protect them from the consequences of that, because we are very concerned about food security, about hunger, right? That's one of the main objectives of this organization. I should point out that when FAO was founded, its key objective was ensuring humanity's freedom from hunger. Okay, that is its key objective, all right? Agriculture also, but mainly that. So that's one thing that we would advise all governments. Please protect people who are vulnerable. Okay. Secondly, supply chains have to be kept functioning. Okay. And this means um, do not completely ban, please try to avoid bans on trade. Okay. Please allow the flow of food to continue. Now, of course, it poses some risks.
Yes.
Of course, right? But this is something that we are afraid of, that if restrictions are imposed on food trade, you could see, Turkey is okay. It doesn't have that much of a problem, but there are other countries in the world which are heavily dependent on food trade. And if trade is just in agricultural products and food is restricted, you could get very sharp increases in food prices. And in some of the poor countries of this region, that could have a devastating impact on people whose incomes have already been cut drastically and who will then basically have to starve if food prices are very high. So, there are two main messages: protect people who are vulnerable, and please try to keep food trade flowing smoothly. In this, there are sometimes interesting, um, some very interesting stories. I mean, for example, bees. I saw a story in the Financial Times today about how bees are transported from one place to another, sometimes across borders, because bees pollinate flowers and plants and so forth. Okay, yeah. So for pollination purposes, they need to be moved, right?
Yes.
And apparently that has stopped. And this could pose a huge problem, because if flowers don't get, I mean, and this applies particularly to fruit and other horticultural products, then that's not going to happen. I mean, if they're not pollinated, then their production will be affected. So there are very interesting stories like these, and where you don't think the problem with bees is that you can't. I mean, someone has to go with them, and so if there are restrictions on the movement of people, then necessarily you're also restricting the movement of bees. And I mean, these are things that that even that policymakers, senior government officials may not be aware of, but they're there. So there are some very interesting stories about this that we can tell. Containers, that's another issue. They are beginning to pile up in many ports. I mean, they're not moving. And where perishable commodities are concerned, that is a major concern. But as I said, right now, there's not much evidence of a major impact. There's not much evidence of food price increases in most countries. So let's hope and pray that it stays that way.
Of course, let's hope it. The evidence, they
Mhm.
can appear in a few weeks or days. Who knows? Everything is changing. Surprise for
I know it's
everyone.
changing very
Yeah.
rapidly.
But you said protect vulnerable people and
Mhm.
protect your supply chain. Thank you for your messages, opinions, and suggestions, Mr. Burka. It was a pleasure to have you
Okay.
here. Thank you for being here today.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye. And please stay safe, and I hope that all our viewers stay safe.